have you on board. As always, we are going to tonight cover a number of different issues, and they're all related, though, one way or the other. I just saw another video from somebody. I went very compelling, at least in terms of his own mind. Very convincing, at least in terms of his own mind. But he said things like, there's a quote, I just typed it down. Coronavirus doesn't exist at all. It's another one of those videos with the conspiracy theory that 5G is doing all the damage. There is no virus. It's 5G. And it's pure horse manure. I'm being very polite. Iran, which has been just decimated in many ways, economically, socially, politically, militarily, it's been harmed by this virus. Virus doesn't have 5G. These people pushing this BS around just don't look at the facts. There's no 5G in Iran. Well, they're planning on getting it, but they don't have it. Do the research. Coronavirus doesn't exist at all. And he also said that there is no evidence that virus and bacterial transmission, how do you put it, can enter the human body unless it is injected into the body. And then he went off rambling about the vaccine. Hey, we're very much against vaccines here. We don't like them. I don't like them. I don't approve. I've read too many ingredient lists. They're full of poison, many of them. And there's a big debate as to whether they really work much or work well at all. Some perhaps do. But this stuff about the vaccine is a given. Disinformation, always remember this, is 80, 85%, maybe 90% fact, and 10% to 20% utter fiction, designed to confuse you, keep you off track. A lot of people grab onto these things. They just hold on to them and start pushing them as quickly as they can. They think it's unique. It's a virus. For someone to actually say that viruses and bacteria are not infectious agents on this planet is insane. Well, what happened in 1919 with the Spanish flu that killed 100 million people? Were all of them vaccinated? So just be careful, all right? Just another word to the wise, and you're very wise. Just keep in mind that there's a lot of crap being pushed around the internet. Now, the other issue that we need to talk about is the role the so-called news media is playing in this nightmare. It's a nightmare. What it's done to this country, what is being done to this country, what is being done to Europe, what happened in China and is still happening in China, etc., is a nightmare. Mnuchin today is saying, let me find my own headline here. Hold on. Mnuchin says 33 million jobs have been or will be lost at minimum. He also told Congress that without bailouts, which Trump is now talking about $1 trillion to be injected into the system, probably won't be nearly enough. Without bailouts, a Depression-era nightmare awaits. Not to mention the 20% unemployment rate that is expected. How long will this last? Will the heat diminish the lethality and infectiousness of the virus? A lot of people don't think so now, because the virus is 10 times more infectious than the flu, and the flu can still be passed around in the summer. So this is 10 times worse. I don't see that the summer warmth and moisture is going to do much to slow it down. And the second wave coming this fall and into the winter is clearly, according to medical history, stronger than the first wave. All right, what we're going to do is spend our first hour tonight with one of the most remarkable researchers, a friend of yours, a friend of mine, Frank Joseph. He has so many wonderful books. He digs into the ancient past, and right now he's digging into the future because one day this will be the past, and we're walking right through the past every day. Think about it. Hello, Frank. Welcome back.
Hello, Jeff. Thank you so much for allowing me to share some of my thoughts with you and your listeners tonight.
You bet. You bet. The media, the news media, 6 corporations own virtually all of it. So how much reality and truth are we going to get when all 6 corporations are in the same bed? I mean,
well, I think the answer to that is to find alternative sources. And right. In doing that, we have to be rather discerning in what we're looking at. And what I was particularly struck with, and the reason I wanted to discuss this tonight, is because I have access to a wonderful magazine. It's produced in Australia. It's called New Dawn. And it's not that familiar in North America because it's just not available here. It's not on the stands, and it's kind of expensive.
I know of it.
I knew you would. It's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it for the most part.
Yep.
And so I'm relying on that and some other things. Like you said, I look into the past, and the reason why I'm interested in the past is because that's the way we can understand why we're here. How did we get to this point here, Right. And so we try to sort that out. I make no pretension in understanding this. I'm as confused as everybody else. But there are a few things I think that do kind of stand out, and I'm going to put some of these things out there and let you and our listeners decide for themselves what's worthwhile. Maybe none of it is. Maybe a few things be worthwhile. Well, the potential going on here. Well, politically, we can say, oh, yes, there are certain groups that cause this. Well, whether they did or not, there are certainly groups that are taking advantage of it, economic groups that are definitely taking advantage of it, and to the point where you wonder, was there some cause involved? I don't know. We're not at that point, but give you an example. Just start with China itself. The Chinese regime now has an excuse for quarantining all those protesters that have been causing so much trouble for the communist regime over the past few months. Now, whether they went to the trouble of causing a virus that would do this or not, nonetheless, they're using it. The same political usage is found here in this country because the liberal establishment is doing everything conceivable to use this to beat up another cultural, to beat up Trump with. It's all his fault for one reason or another. So they're using that.
He's making that rather easy for them with some of his behaviors, shall we say.
Well, that's his way, isn't it? I mean, he is a provocative person. He likes to get their goat. And so
that's why they put him in there. That's why, exactly. I think he was installed. I didn't used to say that with any certainty. I believe it now. Trump's disgusting behavior. Now, get this. 2 weeks ago, as you know, he called the coronavirus a hoax, just a Democrat hoax. But now, today, you know what he said?
Yeah.
He said, I always knew coronavirus was a pandemic long before it was even called one. That's a quote.
Yeah.
This guy is unbelievable. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, actually, he isn't, it's just, you get what you get, But it's interesting, referring back to this, the current issue of New Dawn, they have a thing about there how there are believe it or not, there are economic sectors of investors who gamble on things like this to make millions of dollars of profits. If you can imagine imagine betting on the success or lack of success of an epidemic, and there are. I just want to read this paragraph, if it's okay. It says here, intelligence agencies and gamblers can make millions betting on viruses. In 2002, as part of its Total Information Awareness Project, the U.S. developed PAM, Policy Analysis Markets. They love their strange names like that, evasive, which used real-time global data collected via massive surveillance. PAM allowed agents to bet on certain happenings, including terrorism, assassination, and epidemics. The U.S. Congress denounced the project, but during the Ebola crisis in 2014, which killed over 3,000 people in 5 West African countries, reporters at the NASDAQ ran the headline, quote, "Stocks soaring on spread of Ebola virus epidemic," unquote. The companies, BioCryst, Genetics Corp, Newlink, and a whole bunch of these others, pharmaceuticals, all of them, profited by nearly 20%. Market research published Ebola stocks 2 to sell and 5 to consider buying. It's amazing, the mentality of this, that one can happily consider the profits to be made by betting on this. So there are human parasites out there that are using this as a killing, quite obviously. They definitely are. There's another interesting wrinkle in this. Like I say, I'm sort of shooting all around. I don't have the specific answers for this. I wish to God I did. There is a very brilliant man. I've had a lot of respect for him. He's an astrobiologist. He's the real thing. He works in England at the Buckingham Center for Astrobiology. He's been there for a long time. And he and his colleagues have helped to keep this panspermia idea alive. And for those of our listeners who are not familiar with panspermia, it's the idea that some organic materials can travel through space on comets or meteors and so forth. And the scientific community has no consensus on this, but he's gaining a lot of headway. He's got some pretty good arguments and even some good evidence. We know now, for example, that water is transported by comets, and that's one of the theories of how our oceans got to be, or at least some water here. So anyway, what he is saying, his name is Chandra Wickramasinghe, and he noted that there was a large meteorite or comet fragment, they're not sure, that took place last October 11th at 2:16 in the morning over China, and where it exploded, it was an aerial burst. There was no, it was sort of like that Chelyabinsk meteor that exploded a few years back over Siberia. It was a high altitude burst.
But I think, something like that.
Yeah, it was a sizable burst.
The recent one, not Tunguska. Gotcha.
No, not Tunguska. That's the one. That was enormously devastating. Of course, that was back 1908. No, the one I think was 2013 or 2014, something like that.
Chelyabinsk. Yeah,
Chelyabinsk in Siberia, and people were hurt in that. Nobody was killed, fortunately, but it was an air burst. And so, said,
may I say something?
Ahead, yes.
This is really important, and all of you out there can look this up. Just go to YouTube. Look for the Chelyabinsk meteor. This is interesting. Chely, Chelyabinsk, I believe, meteor. Look it up. Look at the videos. That meteor was intercepted by something and disintegrated in the air. You know this. If you look closely, there are clear pictures of videos of a pencil-shaped object, as in a missile, coming up behind and below it and just completely going right through it and breaking it into pieces. And it's my contention that the Russians have ABM capabilities that they turned on that meteorite because it was headed toward very sensitive Russian military installations. We know that much. And that whatever that was, it went right through that meteor and destroyed it, turned it into pieces. That's what happened. Go ahead.
Well, that's interesting you bring that up, Jeff, because those photographs, those images are available to anybody that can go online and see it. I've seen it, as other people have, but I've never seen a mention of it anywhere in the media. Isn't this an unusual thing? I mean, I've never seen that pointed out. Maybe it's been pointed out, but I've never come across where anybody has said, oh, look
here
at this.
And people talking, some emails. It's obvious the damn thing was hit by a projectile that was fired up to intercept it.
Something intercepts it, absolutely.
Maybe it was done by E.T., our friends, to protect us. I don't know.
Right, that would have been a disaster of truly global proportions if that had happened, because that area of Chelyabinsk, or right in Chelyabinsk, was a repository, a storage area for all of the, not all, but I guess for a depot of the Soviet Union's bacteriological and gas warfare. They put a lot of their old shells and everything there, and they were trying to dispose of these dangerous things.
Right where it was headed.
It was And if that thing had hit, who knows what the repercussions of that would. Then you really would have seen some kind of a global problem, to say, sort of like, hitting a gas dump or something on a global scale.
Right. Good point.
Well, this astrobiologist, Chandra Singhi, he said that last October 11th, this airburst took place early in the morning, and he contends that it's possible, and he doesn't argue that it's possible that some kind of a virus was released that was responsible for the spread around the world. There's no proof of that. His critics say, oh no, that can't possibly be because the coronavirus is related to SARS very closely. Well, that's not much of an answer because nobody knows where SARS came from, supposedly. Nobody knows where SARS came from. That supposedly is a big mystery. So that's one of the things. More likely, and this is the scary part of it, is that what we're looking at probably was a virus that was weaponized. Unfortunately, so much of the evidence that's come out so far does point to the facility at Wuhan. We know, for example, the sequence of events that took place early in January, just right after the New Year, when a husband and wife team from China were arrested by Canadian authorities. They had been working in a couple of laboratories, both in Vancouver and in Washington State, and they had taken sensitive material and were arrested, and instead of being put on trial or anything, they were just deported. But
that's the usual way that spies are handled in superpower negotiations. And it's come out
that those facilities were involved in weaponizing various bacteria. So, in other words,
excuse me again, I want to contribute because you're making such wonderful points. There was a big story, I played a piece of it last night, that the, I guess it was DHS, maybe the FBI, arrested a number of Chinese here who were working at Harvard University in the most sensitive areas of microbiology, nanotechnology, advanced computer science, and they were all caught lying, and several of them were identified as officers in the People's Liberation Army. Big surprise. But that happens all the time, and I'll send you the video for that too. But you raise a very important point. We have very little security against Chinese espionage in this country, and that's been known for a long time.
Well, the tragedy of that is we owe what's going on, if that is the case, to former Presidents Clinton and especially Nixon, who opened up China to the West. Yeah. Until that time, the Chinese government was regarded as a criminal organization, which it has before and since proved exactly what it is. And he opened it up purely to take Nixon did, purely for political reasons. He wanted to be able to enlist some of the support of the liberal establishment, which was all for it, thought it was just great. Let's go back, would be kissing cousins with the Chinese communists. And he was using that as kind of a bailout for he saw the handwriting on the wall for his impeachment and things like that. But nonetheless, he opened up China. And until then, China had been quarantined, and China needed to be quarantined. But that was a criminal rogue state, if there ever has been one. And we have since suffered economically, and now we are suffering in this regard in terms of disease. So I think we owe, if this in fact was a weaponized system that got out of control, and that's what it appears to have been, then the origins for this are with Richard Nixon, and especially, of course, Clinton after him, who was a huge lover of the Chinese establishment and really opened
rocket, the satellite payload catastrophe that was never talked about here. Loral gave the Chinese a very advanced satellite to launch on one of their missiles. Well, funniest thing, one of their missiles with that satellite, the Loral satellite on it, didn't work right, and it crashed seconds after takeoff. Well, the actual satellite itself was recovered by the American defense contractor, the Loral Corporation. They got their satellite back, most of it, went back to the lab and looked at it and found that it had been stripped of all its advanced microcircuitry and computer tech. The Chinese had stripped it before they put it on top of their failed rocket, thinking the rocket would boost into orbit and it wouldn't work and everybody would just wash their hands of it. Wow. But that story never made much news.
Now, the Chinese have been looking for every single opportunity since then and before in order to modernize themselves.
Yeah, keep going, Frank. Let's go through the break here. And I thank our sponsors, and let me just say one thing on their behalf. Every sponsor, every major sponsor I have, from Allison C. at the top, and they're all terrific. Bio Superfood, Greska's Carbon 60, these things all build the immune system extraordinarily well. They're all critical to having the best response you can should you become infected. I'm so proud to have these sponsors on board. OxyC, Allison C is absolutely awesome. I've got the science that shows how it works, but we don't make claims here. Only that these items, these products, can help build your immune system like nothing else. Bio Superfood, for example, has over 15,000 different nutrients in it, every one of which you rarely see in your, not every one, 90% of which you rarely see in your normal diet. So just look at them all, understand they all have a role to play, and they're just wonderful, as are the people who are behind them. Thank you all. Okay, go ahead, Frank.
Well, we're talking about the weaponization of these viruses. Weaponization of disease goes back many hundreds of years. The most outstanding example was the Black Death that happened in Europe. Of course, most people are aware of the plague that overwhelmed Europe and exterminated about 80% of the population. That's an interesting thing. This is where I think history can at least give us some kind of a handle on what's going on, a grip on what we're experiencing. We now know through demographic research, computerized demographic research, that the Black Plague that took place in the 14th century, the mid-14th century in Europe, it killed 200 million people across Eurasia, 200 million people. But it didn't kill all of them. Of course, there was no defense against it. No one knew anything about it whatsoever. It just had to blow its cities in Europe. Most people lived on farms and villages and towns. You had Paris, Madrid, Munich, London, Edinburgh, and maybe a few other true urban centers. And that is where the concentration of the fatalities were concentrated. Also, some of the towns that were fairly nearby. However, those villages that were too far away for people to go to these cities, it was like a once-in-a-lifetime thing if you could leave your village and see Paris, for example, or London, because there was no public transportation. The roads were non-existent or too dangerous. But it is in those villages, those small areas, where the fatality rate was virtually negligible. Nothing at all. They were totally separated from the outbreak that was in the large towns and cities. Now, that applies to our time today because the liberals and the leftists have always been, talking about how wonderful it is. We have this one world and we're all plugged in together. Well, this is the consequence of it. This is just one of the consequences of everybody being plugged in, where there is no sense of isolation. If somebody gets sick, everybody gets sick. If the plague had been allowed to go on, it's estimated that instead of 80% of the population of Europe being exterminated, upwards of 90% or more, it's possible that the entire population would have been killed out, would have been wiped out by the Black Plague. The only thing that saved European civilization at that time were the people that lived on farmsteads. That's the only thing, because there was no other defense. Now, today, we don't have that sort of a thing. Everybody is all plugged in, and here we are. The Black Plague took place because it was weaponized. If it had not been weaponized, it would never have reached Europe. The Black Plague, we now know, came from the Crimea. And what was happening in the Crimea was in 1346, the Mongols had laid siege to a town called Kaffa. And during the siege, the Mongols were having a hard time overcoming the defenders, who were a mix of Europeans and Tartars. But the Crimea, in those days, was like Mars or the moon as regards Europeans. Nobody went there. There was no contact, nothing with it at all. But what happened was the Mongols, having trouble to take the city of Kaffa, this great fortress, they found a number of Tartars who had been killed in battle, who were very sick, who had a disease of some kind. And so they loaded up these corpses and they catapulted them over the walls of Kaffa to create sickness and disease inside the walls of Kaffa. And sure enough, that when they launched a number of these corpses through the air, of these diseased bodies that had this Black Death virus, that's a bubonic plague, of course. It's called the Yersinia pestis. It's a bacterium, highly infectious. And so when the Tartars' bodies landed behind the walls of Kaffa, the city was depopulated and was taken. However, the disease now spread to the Mongols themselves. And it was only because it's believed of a single ship that was evacuating that area, because Kaffa was a port city. They went all the way to Italy, and it went to some Italian port, possibly Naples, not quite sure, and through there it was introduced into Europe. That's how it happened. So it began as a biological weapon. And that has now, the same thing has happened here in China in our time, where it would appear that at Wuhan they had a...
How about the filthy blankets we gave the Indians? There's biowar for you.
That's biowarfare also. Yeah, like I say, there are other examples of people. The Japanese during World War II. I can't say the Japanese because there was a unit, a Japanese unit, kind of almost a rogue unit, which infected parts of the Chinese population to keep their numbers down. When that was found out, by the way, to the Japanese Imperial Army's credit, they put a stop to it. They didn't promote it. During World War II, that was before America got involved, but that was stopped in China. During World War II, at the end of the war, where the Japanese were being firebombed almost to extermination, there was talk of launching biological agents against the United States.
Right.
And some generals
that was Unit 731 that was at work there.
Oh, you're very good, yeah. And some generals wanted to do that, and they wanted to do that they didn't have any bombers left. This is 1945, but they did have their balloon bombs, which is another story. The Japanese had discovered
bombs.
The Fugo bombs. Boy, you're very knowledgeable. It's just really great. I can't tell you anything, but they were going to put these biological agents on these Fugo bombs, balloons, and some of them did reach. Matter of fact, hundreds of them reached the United States. A couple exploded.
One of them killed a family of 5 in Oregon.
Well, it wasn't a family. It was a school
group,
teacher and 4 kids.
Yeah,
4 kids, and a fireman was also killed. So people say, oh, wasn't this a terrible thing? Well, it was a terrible thing, but we were doing terrible things, too. We were incinerating millions of people across Japan. But in any case, the Japanese High Command decided, no, we're not going to do this because the Americans will then launch their biological weapons against us. So it was not done. But biological warfare goes back quite a long time back. Matter of fact, way back into the ancient world. But it was the Mongols' use of these diseased Tartar corpses at Kaffa and the Crimea that was responsible for what happened in Europe. And so there are historical precedents for these things. What happened was in China, according to the latest issue of the New Dawn that I'm looking at, they have a really terrific bit of a news thing here. I won't go into much of it. It talks about a Dr. Francis Boyle. And those of our listeners who be interested in more in this, they can go on YouTube and you can put in Dr. Francis Boyle, B-O-Y-L-E, and he's on a website that is for the, let me just see, I'm trying to find it right here.
He's very smart.
Oh, you know about him. I guess maybe that's all you need to do is to...
He's been on the program many, many years ago.
Oh, really? Oh, well, then I don't have to tell you anything. Yeah, he's terrific. But it is his contention, he's an older fellow now, it is his contention that this thing was weaponized and that it got out of hand. And that's what he believes. There's another very interesting medical practitioner, a highly respected one, Dr. Alan Cantwell, and he talks about how the SARS virus was totally new to virologists, and he thinks it was completely artificially made. And he believes that the SARS virus was the predecessor for the coronavirus. There is one thing I really would like to bring up from the magazine. It's really good. It's called Event 201, the Pandemic Exercise. It says on October 18th, 2019, the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, in conjunction with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, assembled 15 leaders of businesses, government, and public health to simulate a scenario in which a coronavirus pandemic ravaged the planet. Now, this is back in October of last year. In the simulation, dubbed Event 201, the virus infected people all across the globe within 6 months, and by the 18th month mark, it had killed 65 million people and triggered a global financial crisis. When the real coronavirus outbreak occurred, January 27th, post on Facebook recalled Event 201 and included a picture of a souvenir toy handed out at the event. There's a photograph of the souvenir toy here. And the toy is a stuffed animal resembling a coronavirus. Isn't that cute? Nobody has been able to explain why they gave out stuffed souvenir coronavirus toys at Event 201. The post reads, almost like this is a big fun for them. In late January, the organizers of Event 201 released a statement predicting that, quote, the next severe pandemic will not only cause great illness and loss of life, but could also trigger major cascading economic and society consequences that could contribute greatly to global impact and suffering, unquote. So it looks like there's a reshuffling of the deck that's going on. That's the impression. That if this thing was accidental, we can understand it. But if there was something more than an accidental quality to this, then something is being reorganized. And the best way to do that is to panic people, get people in a hysterical frame of mind so they can't think straightly, and then step in with your proposal. And, oh, yeah, that's the way to do it. All this
problem,
is, though,
reaction, solution. You bet.
It is. All this is kind of, though, subverted by the figures so far as I can understand. In the United States, there are 327 million people. And the coronavirus, supposedly, according to what we're told now, has a fatality rate of 5%. Now, that's totally inclusive. It's mostly elderly people, but it goes down to people with respiratory problems. So if we have a population of 327 million, and this virus is allowed to go to its maximum percentage rate, that means it will have a fatality in the United States alone of 16,350,000 victims. However, these statistics are not that reliable. They're somewhat based on the Chinese. We know, for example, that the people who suffer and die of this coronavirus suffer because of respiratory problems. Well, 50% of Chinese people are smokers. Most of them are heavy smokers, so they already have bad
and then the air pollution on top of that.
And then you got horrible air pollution on top. So that skewers with the figures a lot. Remember that we talked about, we didn't talk, but we know about the Diamond Princess, which was that cruise ship that had been quarantined.
You mean the Corona Princess?
The Corona Princess, yeah. But they had 6 deaths occurred among the passengers. That was constituting a case fatality rate of 0.85%. And the important thing about all that is that these 6 fatalities occurred in patients who were all more than 70 years old. Not a single Diamond Princess patient under 70 died. So maybe that's an example that it's not quite that bad. As it is now, it looks as though the majority of people who are going to die of this thing already have serious problems and are up there in years, like myself. I'm in my mid-70s now, but I'm not a smoker. I don't have any respiratory problems. And I'm cautious like everybody else, but I don't feel like I'm doomed just yet. There's too much artificiality associated with this whole thing, and I'm very suspicious like you. I'm very suspicious. The media is riding herd on the masses of our people. They're obviously, the way that this whole issue is being presented is hysteria, sensationalism. It is irresponsible what the news media is doing. If this is a serious outbreak, then it should be done in a calm, straightforward, and informational manner. It's not. It's being done to sensationalize and exploit it.
Yep.
And that alone is enough to make you wonder, well, how real? Is it real or is it Memorex? I mean, there's something very strange about all this.
One, and most importantly, when one is trying to project a case fatality rate, a CFR, you cannot do it unless everyone is out of the hospital. Either they have been healed and released or they passed away. You can't do it with people still pending. So you cannot run figures. We have to wait until this pit bull virus lets people go enough to have enough of them resolved and released before we can begin to project what a case fatality rate in fact is. Otherwise, it's all guesswork. It's just a guess.
I think it really is. It's just guesswork. And, of course, it's natural that we would want to strive to find out something that we can hang our hats on, as it were. But there just isn't enough information out. And the information that's coming out is so convoluted, so contradictory that, people throw their hands up. There was a case of a man, I believe it was in Wisconsin, who contracted coronavirus. He was 89. That's very dangerous for this virus, supposedly. He overcame it. He shrugged it off.
Right.
So, who knows what to make of these things? I mean, it isn't an automatic death sentence if you get it.
Several things at work here. There are things you can take which can build your immune system. There are also discussions that, what is the name of it? It's the active ingredient in coconut oil. On it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I know, but
it comes in little round white beads like. Anyhow, that, I'll figure it out. That is supposedly able to break down the viral membrane, allowing the immune system, the macrophages, to go in there and kill it. That's another thing. There are all sorts of things out there. There's talk about selenium that supposedly makes the virus unable to reproduce and anchor itself. Certainly we know about allicin C. There are other things. Maybe he was doing something. Maybe he had a strain of the virus that had mutated into a dead end. It had nowhere to go. We know there are two main strains at least and multiple other recombinations on the board now. So we don't know. One case like that, it's got to happen. That's great news for him. I hope more report like that.
I bet there shall be. It's important. You brought up a point early in the program where people are thinking that, well, when the weather gets warm, that'll kill the thing off. Well, if this is anything at all like other viruses, have no effect. For example, the Black Death, when it struck Europe, it lasted for 4 years. So 4 winters came and went, and 4 summers came and went. And it didn't have any effect on it at all. Matter of fact, it grew over time until in its last year it petered out. So there's just more mystery to it. You find one thing you think you can believe in, and then something comes along and subverts that.
And the media is doing nothing to help clear the waters.
No, I think that they're just like a lot of these economic exploiters, or one and the same. They just look upon this as something to take advantage of. This is an opportunity for them. You have to consider, too, that the media for the past 4 years has self-destructed itself. And never before has its credibility been as low as it is now. And the general feeling of the media is one of revulsion. And that's really great. It used to be people believed everything that was on the tube, but now people are turning away from that. Well, this is an opportunity for them to redeem themselves in the eyes of the public. Everybody now is watching. Everybody, the viewer audience has increased terrifically, and that's just great. Their ratings are up, and that's that's really good. So they are at least...
Business is good. Yes.
Business is good. So they're going to keep it up. Meanwhile, I don't know what it's like where you are, but when I go to the stores, people are going through the stores, and I'm in Minnesota here, they're going through the stores like locusts in a wheat field. You know, they're just stripping everything out. They're hoarding, which is, you're not supposed to do that. Because if you're hoarding something, you're taking something away from somebody else. And
yes. Are you seeing many masks?
No, all the masks are gone. You can't get. You have to buy them.
Right.
They used to be free, handed out for free. I've heard there's some masks being sold for $100.
That should be criminal. It's disgusting.
Well, it's part of the hysteria. But, I mean, you go to the store now, and there are people that are loading up their shopping carts, even with things they don't really need, what they think they need. And if you go to pharmacies, there are huge lines in there, but every place else is, like, empty. Libraries are closed, of course, theaters, all that sort of a thing.
All the major league sports are down. College sports are closed. This is an historic moment in the history of not just this country, but the contemporary planet we live upon.
Well, it feels very manipulative.
Oh,
I don't think we can take it straight the way it appears.
No
I think the appearances here are all off base.
All right, we got one NBA player positive. You shut the whole league down for the year? What's that? I don't know.
No, I think that, like I said, there's a reshuffling of the deck. And the best way to do that is to panic people.
I don't know if you're able to listen, but I was told this was coming a year ago. I don't want to go into too many details on it, but I was told exactly what was going to happen. And I didn't want to talk about it because no one would have believed it. But this is a basic reset.
I think so.
Changing the way we do business. We're moving into the next world, the next phase. And it's all digital currency. It'll be vote by mail or vote online. It'll be social credit scores. It'll be
exactly
all that and more. And, of course, vaccinations.
I think you're seeing it properly. I think you're seeing it properly. And the only way to get people to do that, especially to do it quickly, is to scare the hell out of them. And so that's what's going on. If you put it up to a vote or let people think about it, it would take too long.
No, it has to be done through trauma and fear.
That's right. The only way that, and they know this, and the way they can get people to do things is to bring out the whip. And so that's what they're doing. They're inciting people, and the news media is obviously a part of it. How much of this is coordinated, I don't know, but there's a large part of it that is being taken advantage of, no doubt about it. And I'm not surprised to hear that you were told last year that such a thing. I was not aware of it, but now reading in retrospect, like this event 201, the pandemic exercise that I mentioned, that took place last October. Right. That's not that far. So
I hesitate to mention it because I don't like to sound like some other talk show hosts.
No, I think you should mention it.
Not
all reporters disclose their sources, but they have to mention this material. So I think it's good that you did mention it. I think you should discuss it as much as you feel comfortable.
Well, we talked about it last night with Dick Allgaier. That YouTube video is now up at the top of headlines. So for all of you who may have missed it last night, please go and listen to it. 46 minutes or whatever it is, 47 minutes of very important information. It's right there.
Well, I'm very glad that you had Dr. Boyle on your program.
Oh, it's been a long time. It's 15 years, I don't know.
Oh, my gosh, really? I have a wonderful quote from him about this. He says in the New Dawn, he says, "It does not seem to me that the Wuhan laboratory is the source of the coronavirus. My guess is that they were researching SARS, and they weaponized it further by giving it a gain-to-function property, which means it could be more lethal. It appears the coronavirus that we're dealing with here is an offensive biological warfare weapon that leaked out of that Wuhan lab." I'm not saying
You know why you're right? You know why you're right? Because early on, when China was in chaos, President Xi went on national television and called for a massive increase in security at all their bioweapons lab facilities. Now, why would he say that?
Why would he say that?
Why would he say that back then? Connect the dots.
Just at the time that Dr. Boyle is mentioning. He concludes, he says, "I'm not saying it was done deliberately, but there have been previous reports of problems with that lab and things leaking out of it.
Right. That's right.
And I'm afraid that it is what we are dealing with today," unquote.
Exactly. Well,
So,
President Xi, there was another development. It wasn't from Xi. Another story or two that came out at the same time, and it was clear. They came and went so fast, you really had to be watching, that they were very concerned about leaks from their laboratories, especially that one. So I think that's the source.
well, the real source, I think, was President Richard Nixon, I think, because he opened the door,
Ping pong.
the Pandora's
Ping pong
box,
Dick.
the ping-pong diplomacy and all that, and that China needed to be quarantined. And so now we are suffering because of what he did. Now, that door could have been closed after him because he left in disgrace, but instead it was opened even further by the likes of Bill Clinton, and here we are. So it's a terrible thing that we all have to suffer. But I think those statistics that I mentioned are not all that reliable. I said there might be something like 16,350,000 deaths from this thing. Well, that's true, but a number of these people are already suffering from serious respiratory problems or cancer or diabetes. So that number has got to be lowered. In other words, they would have probably suffered and died anyway, although perhaps not as soon. This will be the last straw, as it were.
You're absolutely correct, Frank. Totally correct.
So I don't really regard it as quite the terrible phenomena that is being made out to be, but this doesn't mean we shouldn't be as careful as possible. And I believe in improving the immune system. That is vital.
Absolutely.
That is vital.
If this were cutting down people in their teens and children and young adults, it's not. It's just
not.
some
No,
are being infected and impacted, and some are dying, but very, very few. So
apparently, the only kids that are dying of this are the ones that already have severe respiratory problems.
That's right. This is almost a house cleaning bioweapon, if you think about it. That's how the international globalist elite would view it. We're going to get rid of the older people, the sickly people. So we've got mostly millennials now, and we can forget about all the knowledge and wisdom that the older people had because it doesn't exist anymore. It's gone.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. But let's just, I think it's important for us, as you stressed, to maintain our immune system. We do that by taking some of the products that you mentioned. Anything that helps in that regard is vital. And I'm trying to get as much vitamin C and so forth as I can. I remember Dr. Linus Pauling. He stressed strengthening the immune system as much as possible. So something like that.
He was correct. Vitamin C is vital. The Chinese were using IV vitamin C with one or two other components to treat people. I don't know how successful that was. But
probably not successful because it takes time for one's system to incorporate the vitamin C to be saturated naturally and properly. It takes years, actually, to build that up. So I've been taking vitamin C for decades.
If they'd only done IV ozone, and I'm not talking about pure ozone, it's 98% medical-grade oxygen, 2% ozone, it would cure people. Ozone cured thousands of people with AIDS in Africa, and then they shut it down. They, being the international pharmaceutical globalist government elite, they shut it down.
Oh, absolutely.
The guy who was behind it, and I've forgotten his name now, forgive me, was hit by a car and nearly killed over there.
So, we know about things like that, don't we?
Yep. He was curing people with ozone, IV ozone. It works.